What's happening, guys? Happy Wednesday and welcome to the Dynasty WarZone, the People's Dynasty podcast. It is your boy. It is Memphis. I am back. Sorry about last week. You may notice a little bouncing, a little echo in my voice. I'm back in my studio, but without any carpet. We had a little flood here at the Memphis compound last week, and due to a work thing, I do not have Jerry tonight. There will be no man of the hour. There will be no man with the power. I was the man without the power last week, but I have a man who's chock full of NFL power. We have an amazing guest kicking off guest season with us. He is a former NFL salary cap guy. He is a fantasy and dynasty enthusiast. He is an avid Ohio State Buckeyes football fan. He's a University of Miami alum. And he is the co-host of Roto Underworld's The Decision Point podcast with Matthew Kelly, aka the Podfather. It is none other than Anand Naduri. Anand, welcome to the Dynasty WarZone.
Hey, Memphis. Hey, everybody out there. Thanks for having me, man. Love a lot of the stuff that you put out on Twitter. Obviously, it takes a while for me to get into the dynasty scene, so to speak, because most of my experience for a long time was with redraft, kind of figuring out those values and kind of seeing how things are a little bit different, in dynasty land. And it's always fun, right? Because I think that my favorite part of entering that dynasty space, so to speak, is watching how people value someone. Because obviously in redraft, you're only valuing them for, 17 weeks, so to speak. But in dynasty, you've got a lot longer than 17 weeks to hold on to somebody. So it's a whole lot of fun, and I'm really excited to get into it. Thanks for having me.
No, man, thank you for joining me. And, we have a mutual friend in common, Tyler. I always butcher his last name. I just call him Tyler O. He produces the Daily Destroyer. He does our DFS show here on the Dynasty WarZone Network. And you can find that on YouTube. You can find that on podcast. It usually drops. Depends on Tyler and Lou. Sometimes they drop it late Friday night. Sometimes we drop it early Saturday morning. When I don't have a studio, sometimes we have to drop it when we can drop it. But super appreciative to have you here. And make sure you're following us on YouTube. Make sure you give Anand a thumbs up. Let him know his appearance here was worth it. Help us with that algorithm. So I asked Anand before we hit the record button if he was cool taking care of our super favorite segment, Good People, Bad Tweets. Now, when I asked you if you were willing to join us, did that scare you at all? Because we're going to tear someone down in a nice sort of way.
No, because I think a big part of the process of getting better at anything is understanding that nobody's going to be right 100% of the time, right? So this isn't an indictment on whoever made the tweet or necessarily what they were trying to do. It's just, even the best process sometimes yields bad results.
This is why you bring a guy like Anand on. He's so well spoken. He spent time in the NFL working with real salary caps. So very well stated. Well, this next tweet was not very well. It was grammatically it was perfect, by the way.
We love that.
I do love that, and it's at Harrison P. Kent, and that is the Twitter handle. NFL draft analyst Harrison P. Kent. Mr. Kent went on to write, Jerry Rice, laughably ran a 4.71 40, would be a practice squad player in today's NFL. A prime Rice, my algorithms suggest, his algorithms, by the way, his algorithms would suggest would be the 193rd most effective wide receiver today. Rice, enabled by coach and QB talent, was somewhat effective in his day. But today's wide receivers are a different breed. Anand, when I read that tweet to you, what comes to mind?
Memphis, I think, one, I hope that's a parody account. It might be, it might not be, I'm not sure. But I don't understand how your process got you there, right? Like, I think obviously everybody's trying to advance football analytics and, give us more interesting data points and numbers and stuff to be interested in, which makes sense, right? Like the goal for any kind of analytics or any kind of algorithm is to be the best of its kind. And within sports, I think we'd all unanimously agree the best analytics are in baseball because they started first and they've cared about it the longest. what if you have an algorithm that leads you to Jerry Rice being 193rd in anything? Yeah, I just I don't know how you can defend that process. I hope that has been tweaked since then. But I mean, it's the same process that gives you a Michael Thomas in the second round, right? Like not the most dynamic numbers you've ever seen at the combine, but he just gets open and catches balls. I mean, it's hard to explain, but yeah, I think Jerry Rice succeeds in any era. I don't think that matters a whole lot. There's a really fun stat out there. I'm not sure what exactly the number is, but I think Jerry Rice had 1,000-yard season at age 39 or 40. And like the second most receiving yards at that age are Tom Brady with 12. Like it's just, I mean, Jerry Rice is one of a kind. There's no debating that he's the greatest wide receiver ever. If you ask me, I know that there are people that prefer Moss there, that go back and forth, but to me, it's always going to be Jerry.
I was just floored by this because I appreciate the intelligence. I'm looking at Mr. Harrison P. Kent IV's Twitter profile. He is the CEO and founder of Kent Analytics. He went to Harvard, Phi Beta Kappa, fluent in Latin. So apparently you don't get into Harvard being a dum-dum. But this is obviously a good person with a bad tweet. And if he was looking for engagement, Mr. He got it. This thing's got something like 1,900 retweets. Yeah, quote 1,988 quote tweets, 1,400 likes, and 173 retweets. So if he was engagement farming, mission accomplished. I just don't think your algorithm is taking into account the manalytics or the work ethic of Jerry Rice. I think people like Jerry Rice, Michael Jordan, Lawrence Taylor. I got football, baseball, Derek Jeter. These guys are not going to be denied. I don't care if they played in the 40s, the 70s, the 2000s. You can't put what's inside Jerry Rice's heart and his work ethic in there. Cooper Kupp, I mean, you work with Roto Underworld, the best, player profiler. It's the best analytics site, way better than a PFF, and that's not a shot, but especially for what we would do with fantasy football. It's fantastic. You wouldn't look at Cooper Kupp's profile and think, well, there's the next guy who's going to challenge Calvin Johnson's record for 1,900 yards. But sometimes people just have it like that. And I just thought, man, this is a horrible tweet. If you would, I don't know. It just drove me crazy. One of our patrons, Austin, sent this tweet to me. He's like, this has got to qualify.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I just don't know how you get to that.
When I first read the tweet from Austin, I was like this. I didn't know what Austin wanted me to do with it besides get it on the show. So here we go. It was this more than mind-blowing that this, in fact, was the tweet. So we'll jump into the body of the show. So for those of you that are not listening to the Roto Underworld network of podcasts, that's fine. It's a particular cup of tea. It doesn't always appeal to everybody. But I will tell you right now, if you are not listening to the Decision Point, you guys usually drop Thursday, Friday.
Yeah. So the show typically goes live Wednesday. I'm not sure if it's YouTube, Twitter. Matt takes care of all that. I'm just a guy with an opinion. But typically it's either Thursday morning or Friday morning that they go live if we've done a show that week.
I subscribe to the network because I don't want to miss the Decision Point. I don't want to miss Josh Larkey either. Josh has been on. Cody, you're now the third member of the Roto Underworld family to have been on. That nice banner that Cody has in the background, I hooked him up with my banner guy. I don't even have my banner up, but I hooked him up with my. So by the way, if you're a podcast or a content creator and you need a banner guy, hit me up in the DMs at DWZ Memphis. I'll get you to my banner guy because who doesn't have a banner guy? But the Decision Point, Code Breaker, what's Josh's podcast? It's on the tip of my tongue.
It'll come to me. I was thinking, I'm missing.
But it drops on Tuesdays, Mondays, Tuesdays, and he also does the DFS show with Mike Randall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I listen to a lot of these shows, but you cannot miss the Decision Point. Anand, he worked with a real NFL team. I'm not going to ask you which one, but you worked in the salary cap office of a real NFL team, and you have firsthand knowledge of what it's like to try to fuse real football with fake football.
Yeah.
And what are the biggest things that you see as someone who's worked inside of an NFL building that 99.99% of my audience in the Dynasty WarZone audience will never see? as much as we would all love to. What do you see the difference between the mentality within those buildings and then the mentality within, I won't say average, because if you're listening to a Dynasty podcast, if you're listening to the Dynasty Warzone, if you're listening to Roto Underworld, you're not average. You're
Right.
above average. You're an above average fantasy or Dynasty or football consumer.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to paint you in that bucket, but what would be the difference between your listeners, our listeners, and the people that you used to work with in an NFL front office?
So I think the biggest difference between the two is optimism, right? In a front office, if you're looking at a player, right, you can, in theory, in Dynasty, hold on to somebody waiting for them to break out on the NFL level like they did in college, right? Like you can, if you had a rookie draft where you drafted Austin Eckler because you knew he made the roster for the Chargers and just held and held and held and held and held, right? That was a strategy. Whereas for the Chargers and their actual front office, every single day someone was on the practice squad fighting to take his job as that lifeline on the bottom of the roster. And so that's kind of a thing that as dynasty players we don't really pay attention to as much and just don't have to, right? Because your goal is to identify talent as it's breaking out or potentially before it breaks out. The job of an NFL GM in a front office is to figure out what is their value, right? And so I think that's starting to make its way into Dynasty where now you're seeing people trade a lot more than it used to happen, right? Week by week, day by day, you see all of these Dynasty trades coming in. And I think it is starting to resemble more of how front offices value players. Like I think as we continue in this Dynasty space and even into Devy, if you're into that, like it is starting more to resemble what actual front offices are doing than it did in the past.
No, that's very well said because I like the way that you use the word optimism because there was a movie once that was called Hope Floats. So does shit.
Yeah.
And sometimes that gets you in trouble.
Yeah.
Take lock and just, I've always said clinging on to a mistake just because you spend a lot of time making it gets you in a lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always been, I'm going to be a year too early than a year too late on a guy. Has it burned me in the past? Sure, it has. Has it served me well? Absolutely, it has. So, as someone that I listen to regularly, can you give me a high level on your thought of dynasty trades in general? Like, do you when you do a trade in dynasty or when you see a trade maybe posted on Twitter, what are the first thoughts that you're looking for when you look at a trade?
So I think this is one thing that obviously carries from dynasty to um to real life, right? And so I sent out a tweet the other day, I think it must have been a week or two ago, kind of looking at all of the quarterbacks in this 2022 draft class and how having a great pick in the first round of an NFL draft, not all of them are created equal, right? Like, given my choice, I would rather have the second pick in next year's draft than the first pick in this one. And that's simply because Bryce Young, CJ Stroud would be better than any of the quarterbacks we have in 2022. And I think Dynasty is starting to adopt that as well, where it's okay, now that we have a level below this in terms of Devy, where you have all of these rankings for now players that are in college and going to eventually make it to your Dynasty roster. Now you have this kind of template for, okay, well, I've seen this guy play. I've seen this guy play. I've seen this guy play. I know which year of picks that I need to target. And so maybe you do amass a bunch of 2022 first rounders somehow. You have 3 or 4 22 first round picks. In my eyes, what I would be trying to do is move those for 23s, right? And it doesn't have to do with what's available to you at the time. It's just you have a much better shot of hitting a home run with, especially if you need a quarterback in 23 than you do in 22, even though the volume of 2022 quarterbacks taken, that by teams that need a starter might be more.
Okay, I like how you transition the conversation to QB. So this is if you played Yahtzee back in the day, you put all the dice in the cup and you shake them up and you roll them out on the table. You see what you get. That's how I feel this year's quarterback draft class is going to go.
Yeah.
I don't think there's so much talent separating these guys, I think this year, and I've always factored, so we were just referring to Mr. Kent's algorithm. I've always done my own mixture. I mean, you can take so much from the college data, but the minute you have NFL draft capital, I think those data points are equally as important as what you did in college and what you did at the combine. Who's coaching you? Who are your teammates? Do I think Mac Jones would have been as successful as he's been if he had went to the New York Jets and Zach Wilson had went to I see you shaking your head, so you're saying no.
No.
So you agree? What are your thoughts on that when you hear that this quarterback class is going to be very landing spot dependent?
So Matt and I talk a lot on Decision Point. We had actually a fairly lengthy portion of an episode once where I was talking about how where you're from in the college football landscape matters, right? It's more of an adjustment for a Mac Jones, for a Justin Fields, for a Trevor Lawrence, who had competition that they played week after week, where their O linemen were just better than the guys that they were playing against. Their wide receivers were going to get open against any DB they played against. Their running backs were just better than anybody trying to tackle them. And when you have that kind of disparity in talent, and then that gap shuts so quickly as you go from one level to the next, sometimes it can be a little bit harder for guys that played on these powerhouse football teams, especially at quarterback, to make that jump, right? Whereas on the other side, you have a flip side of it. If you go get a Nick Saban defensive back, the odds that he has better NFL coaching than he's already had is virtually zero, unless you end up in New England, right? And so you've got to kind of gauge the difference between this player's had his talent maximized at the college level versus this player performed admirably given the coaching and the teammates and their surrounding pieces. And there's still a lot more to get out of them. So it's more, one's more of a projection and the other one is, what did you do in college? And I think the best example of that in this upcoming class, obviously it's not dynasty related, but is evaluating Michigan's two edge rushers in Hutchinson and Ojabo. Ojabo's got the higher ceiling, I think, personally. He just hasn't had it all sort of wrung out of him yet. Whereas Hutchinson's a much more finished product. And it's hard with these quarterbacks just because there aren't really any finished products in this class like we had last year. But that's one of the things that you have to look at when you're trying to evaluate. It's difficult to evaluate a Zach Wilson at a BYU and a Trevor Lawrence at Clemson in that same breath, just because what they had around them is so different.
No, again, very well said. And one thing that I learned this at a long time ago at a business seminar in Orlando. The guy's name, I think it was Mike Snow or it was Dennis Snow. He had worked as a high level executive for Disney, and he wrote a book on business called Lessons from the Mouse. And one of them was Everything Speaks. It's like if you go in Disney, every so many feet there's a trash can. If a character's out on the floor or the grounds of the park, they're in a everything that you see matters. Everything that you do matters. And that was, I saw this about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago at a seminar in Florida, like I said, and I've added that into my dynasty evaluation of players. Where you went to college matters. Your draft profile matters. Your competition you played with matters. One thing that Roto Underworld, and I forget which one of the apps does it, the teammate score matters. Everything matters, but so does the coaching staff that you're playing with. No offense to Robert Saleh, and it's one of the LaFleurs. I think it's Mike LaFleur in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing against those guys, but they probably, as a first-time coordinator and a first-time head coach, don't have as much on the ball as Josh McDaniel and Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
And that's where I factored into my drafts, is that I have to look at my roster. Okay, I've already got Josh Allen and I don't know who's a middle of the road quarterback. I got Josh Allen and Derek Carr. So I've got my QB1, I've got my QB2 and a super flex. I can afford to roll the dice on a Zach Wilson on the upside. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I had Josh Allen and going into this year, Carson Wentz, who plays for my favorite team, by the way, I probably would have wanted to make the safer pick and went with Mac Jones. So all of these things matter to me. Would you say that's somewhat indicative of the mindset in NFL offices, that everything matters?
Yeah. I mean, they're going to take into account everything, right? Like the really well-run front offices are going to call your high school coach and ask them, especially round 1, 2, 3 guys. They're going to ask them, how hard did he work before he got to college? Have you seen a transformative difference from when he was in your program to what he is now? Was he always an alpha, a leader of men, the hardest worker on your team, even though he was the best player? They're using all of that stuff in combination with your college stats, talking to your college coach, talking to other players you played with. There's a lot that goes into an evaluation. And it just goes to show you, as much as people miss on dynasty picks, there are some glaring first round misses by front offices too after doing all of that research. So it's definitely not an exact science. And I think that's one thing that they do have in common where, even after asking all the questions, crossing all the T's, dotting all your I's, you're still waiting for the, oh, wait, but there's this that you never ever find out about or have any chance to know. You can only know what you put time into knowing, right? And if there's something to find, odds are you're going to find it. But, there's stuff that goes unnoticed all the time.
All right. Well, while we're talking rookies, let me ask you this. So you're in some dynasty leagues,
Mm-hmm.
and we have startup season around the corner. I'll ask you a couple of startup questions here in a minute. Rookie drafts. Now, with your knowledge of what you know about these prospects, would you prefer your dynasty league draft these rookies before the landing spot or after the landing spot? So do you want to do your dynasty league draft before the NFL draft or after?
I prefer after, just because if you end up with someone, like I'll go back, I think it was 2020, 2019. James Morgan out of FIU was a guy that I liked a lot, but I think he got drafted to the Jets, and the landing spot just completely tanked not only my opinion of, what he could be as an NFL quarterback, but also the value of the pick that, would have been required to take him. So I think doing it after is more, I guess, true to what you're trying to do, but doing it before adds an element of fun, no doubt. Personally, I would rather have the information. I'd rather do it after.
Yeah, any puzzle, any game of chance is you're better competing if you have more information. But part of doing what we do, that's why I love doing mock drafts. So we'll be starting very soon. Dallas has the first episode of the rookie rundown. I've already got the file. It'll be up on Monday. Let's see, that'll be the 10th. So Monday the 10th, I'll have the first episode that Dallas recently recorded of the rookie rundown. And then we'll move the rookie rundown to Tuesday, and we'll start doing what we call mock draft Monday. Maybe we'll get you back on. You can do a rookie mock with us.
Sure.
People, we love to mock draft. First of all, we'll draft anything. The fantasy footballers, they do it with their Spitballer show where they draft movie characters. We've drafted food. I mean, we've drafted everything. But yes, I agree. Now, as someone who follows the draft process, mock drafts and everything really closely, and a lot of people do, I think I would have a better shot than the layman, and I know you would for sure, than the layman of drafting our dynasty league before the NFL draft. But the best time, if you're a hardcore dynasty gamer, which you're listening to a podcast, again, you are, the best time to get your league to do your draft is literally the Sunday after the NFL draft is over. Because you've already done all your research, you know all about the prospects, you know about the landing spot now, and boom, you're ready to draft. That's my absolute favorite way to draft. Well, I
Yep.
see you nodding your head.
Yeah. I think that's right around the right window, right? If you've got people doing chaotic stuff, I understand if you can't just immediately get to it that Sunday, but sometime in that week after, before they get into the stadiums and you hear about practice reps and all that stuff, right? Because the thing is, you want to have information, but you don't want to have all the information. I don't think there's a give and take there where you have enough of an information about the landing spot and how they're going to be used, but you don't have initial practice reports and OTA information and mini camp stuff. So yeah, I'm with you. I think as quickly after the NFL draft as you can is probably that sweet spot where you have enough information, but not so much that it's already defined.
Yeah, the longer you wait to have, so if you have control of your draft or you want to get things going, because you're going to be listening to the Dynasty Warzone and you're going to be listening to the Decision Point with an Anand and Matt, then you want to get your drafts. Hey, just suggest it. Hey, let's just get this over with. Because if it strings out into June or July, all of your league mates are going to finally get off their ass. They're going to start listening to Matthew Berry, and they'll know some of the names, and then there goes your edge. If we learn anything from Vegas, that little bit of house edge is what makes it the difference. So you've talked quarterbacks for me, and you did mention another wide receiver prospect. But who are your in the show doc I sent you? I said biggest, but who are your three favorite? Who are three draft eligible players in 2022 that maybe you're intrigued by, you think are going to be a hit? Just give us three names in a quick, paragraph on each.
The quarterbacks, if you follow me, if you've heard from me before, Matt Corral is my favorite. He's a very interesting quarterback. He's definitely a high upside, very, very intriguing prospect. Would I take him in the top 10 if I'm an NFL team? Probably not. But I don't think anybody's worth the top 10 pick in this draft. So I'm very interested to kind of see where he lands. Obviously, Ole Miss, very, very prolific offense, but kind of the knock on him is how much of his production was based on the offense and how much was him. In the wide receivers, obviously, I love my Buckeyes and Wilson Olave, but Treylon Burks is, I know we talked about him earlier. He's going to blow up the combine. I mean, he's just going to do absolutely ridiculous things at the combine and be that very, very high riser. And then I think, the other one for me, especially in that wide receiver area, is David Bell of Purdue, right? He's got a very interesting profile build where if he goes to the right team, especially kind of in that second round of the draft, I think that he could have more value as a fantasy player than some of the guys taken kind of in the bottom half of round one, top half of round two, just based on his landing spot. So those are the kind of the three guys that I'm looking at. Obviously, he's also going to do great stuff at the combine and kind of that Senior Bowl combine time is kind of going to shake out a little bit of where we're going to have all of these players ranked. But those are kind of the three guys that I'm really looking at.
All right. So I did mention the Open. You are an avid, not just a fan, ladies and gentlemen, an avid fan of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Let me put you on the spot. So I think I'm a little bit older than you. I'm same age as Matt, give or take a year or two maybe. But I think the most underrated wide receiver of that era was Marvin Harrison. I believe he had 8 straight 10 touchdown, 1,000-yard seasons in a row. Now, some of those were as many as like 1,515. Hall of Famer. Give me a little something on his son. Marvin Harrison Jr. had to step up in the bowl game against Utah because your boy Olave and Garrett Wilson have already opted out or I guess opted into the draft, but opted out of the bowl game. Yeah. Give me your thoughts on, I know he's a true freshman, if I remember correctly, but yeah, I absolutely loved watching Marvin Harrison. Very understated guy, especially for a guy who played in the era of T.O. and Chad Johnson and Randy Moss and a very large group of outspoken wide receivers. What are your thoughts on Marvin Harrison Jr.? So
I loved his dad's game. Obviously, one of my favorite receivers ever. I think he should be one of everyone's favorite receivers ever, just because he was super understated in what he did and just showed up again and again and again, even especially in the biggest moments. So you love that he comes from the lineage of that. And obviously we saw what Smith and Jigba did all of this year, but especially in that bowl game. All I heard all off season was just wait until you guys see Marvin Harrison. And obviously he was a 4-star, and the two guys behind him and Emeka Buka and God, the other one's name is escaping me, but those two are 5-stars, and he jumped them already. And he is going to be the number 2 receiver at Ohio State next year. I think the thing that you love about him is steps into a big game, first start ever immediately is the Rose Bowl. That's a really tough ask of anybody. And to play as well as he did really speaks volumes about what he's going to be and what he already is, which he's already really, really good. And he's only going to get better 2 years in. I have a feeling he's probably not going to be a guy that stays for his senior year at Ohio State. I think he's probably going to be another one of those, first round or even top 2nd round picks. But man, what an entrance for him. And we love seeing his game. We love having him on campus. And a fun fact for you, when CJ Stroud goes to the NFL, Kyle McCord, the 5-star true freshman that's behind him, was actually Marvin Harrison Jr.'s quarterback out of Pennsylvania. And so that's going to be a fun thing to watch, watching the high school teammates go at it again.
Well, first of all, for all you Devi and Canton to campus gamers, you want to take a note of that. Because that backup quarterback was part of the reason the one young man with the sweet, sweet mullet went back to
Quinn
Texas.
Ewers, yeah.
Thank you. He went back to Texas.
Yep.
And so these are the kind of names that as you go into your rookie drafts, which for you Devi players will include these Devi players. These are some key, what we call here on the show, writer downers. You want to write, what was that quarterback's name again?
Kyle McCord.
Obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., that cat's out of the bag. He's probably already rostered in your Devi league, just off name value alone. But Kyle McCord is a name you got. And let me ask you a quick question, because this conversation just kind of spiraled, but I'm having a good time. Is there a more undervalued, underutilized, undermentioned position coach in the NCAA than Brian Hartline, the wide receivers coach for the Ohio State Buckeyes? My goodness. You go back to one of my personal favorites, Terry McLaurin. You mentioned Michael Thomas. We got Olave. We got Wilson, Marvin Harrison, the one guy who's got the hyphenated name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce.
Yeah.
Is there a more underutilized, underappreciated position coach in the NCAA than Brian Hartline?
I think so. When you're trying to evaluate a position coach at the college level, it's really two things. One, can you recruit at the level necessary to keep your program afloat when guys like Olave and Wilson do opt out of bowl games? It's going to happen. It's going to start to happen more often as NIL kicks in and these kids start to make huge money and make financial decisions for themselves, like the adults that they are and the adults that they should be paid to be, right? I think we all agree that these kids have earned that keep. And I think in navigating all of that, what Hartline has done so well is say, hey, look, if you come in as a 4 or 5-star prospect, not only am I going to get you to the NFL, I'm going to get you drafted high, and I'm going to get you opportunities to get on the field early. We're going to put you on special teams early in your career. I'm going to give you opportunities to return punts. We're going to get you out there as much as possible. So some NFL team can see, hey, Ohio State's got 3 first-round wide receivers in Olave, Wilson, and then probably Smith and Jigba next year, right? But they're trusting Marvin Harrison on 3rd down and goal. They're trusting Emeka Buka to do this. They're trusting Travion Henderson to do that, right? And so as a receiver coach, one of the big things that I think people overlook is how do you take 5-star talent and make them better so that they're ready to do what a Justin Jefferson did in his rookie season, a Jamar Chase did in his rookie season, or a Michael Thomas did in his. Because there's no hiding, how good these players are when they come to campus as highly recruited as they are. The question is, can you get that last gear out of them? And I think he's been better than anybody else in the country at doing that. What he's done in the last couple of years is absolutely insane. If you haven't looked, just go look at the depth chart for Ohio State wide receiver wise in the last 3 or 4 years and then going forward. It's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I think Hartline started there in 2016. That feels right. If not, I'm close.
Yeah.
Just go back and look at the wide receivers that have come out of Ohio State since then, and look at what's going forward. The man is a blessing if you worship in scarlet and gray. All right, I'm gonna hit you with a couple of rapid fire because startup season's right around the corner.
Yeah,
we have a Patreon over at patreon.com/Dynasty WarZone. I'm very proud of myself. The season ended last night. We're recording this on a Tuesday. I've already got 1/3 of the league winners and runners up paid. My goal is to have all 12 taken care of by the end of the week. Go me. And but they're already, itching, right? You hear that scratching at the door. Hey, Memphis, when are we going to do some more startups? Let me get last year's winners paid first. Then we'll start talking startups. So startup season right around the corner. Everyone's going to have the itch. Now, are you a win now guy? Are you a productive struggle where maybe you skip a year, you stock up on young guys and draft picks? Or do you just kind of wait and see what draft position? What are your initial just quick thoughts on a startup?
I think the biggest question that you need to answer in a startup is you have to look at everything objectively, right? If you could draft at every slot in that startup. Maybe go 3-4 rounds deep before you obviously have to get to kind of depth and other things. But if you look at that and say, hey, who most closely aligns with what I think I would have done in their slot? Who do I think personally had the best draft out of their slot, especially in a startup? I think judging your own roster against whatever you think that is, if you think that's yours, great, right? But if you don't, just because you got picked off a couple of times or because you know somebody just did very strongly at a position of need, whatever the case may be, I think objectively you can look post draft and be like, and kind of give yourself a, should I go all in this year or should I wait and kind of see how my team does and then make some in-season trades? I'm personally more of a let's go for it all from the beginning so that people come to you and, everybody wants, and look, if this is true in the NFL too, everybody wants a piece of a championship team and their value is never going to be higher than when you win a championship, realistically speaking. Unless you won a championship with Cooper Cup last year and then you got it and then you kept him into this year, right? Like unless you have one of those kinds of cases, typically their value is never going to be higher than when you win a championship with them. So I'm a big fan of the try to win a championship and then sell high in that post-championship window. If you think for some reason that they're not capable of repeating it again, you're worried about injuries, you're worried about a backup, you're worried about a coaching change, whatever it is. But that's typically how I like to do things. I think if you have a shot, you go for it, right? Like, we had a whole lot of teams that definitely were not the best team for 17 weeks of the season, winning it in week 17. So this year is kind of the proof that, and I know not every year is going to be like this year. There were a lot of opt-outs and stuff like that. But I think this year is proof that, even struggling teams that struggle early can be a lot of fun.
My biggest, thing with a startup is you're drafting with an intent. Go in there now. Have a plan. Plans change. A certain player's on the board. Maybe you have to zig or you zag. Maybe there's a startup trade that you weren't anticipating landing in your lap. So it's cool to adjust your plan on the fly, but at least walk in with a plan.
Yeah.
Because like I've told some of our patrons, like if you're doing a startup and it's a one QB, so you're drafting wide receivers and running backs in the first round. If you draft Devontae Adams or you draft Tyreek Hill, you have committed to trying to win now because you're not going to be able to trade them out of season for what they're worth because they're 28, 29 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're drafting that as the cornerstone of one of your startup picks, you have made a declaration. You have declared that by drafting Derrick Henry would be another one. I have to win the championship this year. And then your draft should be tailored and you make decisions and you may have to pivot because maybe you get blown up in the draft, but at least come in with a plan. I'm with Anand. I'm a win now guy. I'm a big fan of winning now because if you win the league in the first year, or in the first 2 years, let's say the buy-in's $50. I think that's a very common buy-in across the dynasty and fantasy landscape. Let's say the buy-in's $50 and first place is $350. Well, you got your $50 back, and then you're on basically a free roll for the next 6 years because the additional $300 pays your entry in theory, if you have good bankroll management skills. It pays for your league for the next 6 years. Then you can kind of do whatever. But if you don't have a plan and you get this thing blown up and going sideways, you could be pouring money into this thing, never knowing when you're going to be able, and you're having fun. But I play to win and I play for money. So I'd like to give myself, at least in the near future, the best chance to do both.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna throw you this, and then I'm gonna ask you about a couple of veteran players.
Okay.
What is your best piece of startup dynasty advice you would give to our listeners? Like, what's one thing? Like for me, it's having a plan. Also, I always print off Mike Clay. He does his dynasty rankings. I really don't care about his rankings, but what I love about Mike Clay's is that they're easily printable. I'm old fashioned, and they have all of the players' year and month of age at the start of the next season. So, hey, he's 27 in 5 months or whatever it is. And then I create my own tiers. Mm-hmm. Those are a couple of my best pieces of startup advice. What are a couple of yours?
Number one, especially when you talk about startups, is you need to think about season one particularly, right? Because in a startup, everybody wants to look to the future and think, hey, what are we going to do in season 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I have Trevor Lawrence. He's going to be great later. Like a lot of the thought process of a startup is in the future. One piece of advice that I would give out is it's not a bad idea to start fast because everything's for sale. If you start winning week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you have someone productive and you can, gain a second round pick the following year from somebody who you spent a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round pick in developing, right? Not only did he help you win early on, but also you've gained another asset in the future that you could potentially flip into something else. You could trade for a player that you think has a little more upside than the guy that you gave up. It's all about amassing quote unquote draft capital, chips, whatever you want to call them. I think that it's interesting to see how people do it. My personal approach is I want to start as fast as possible so that I can maximize value quickly. And maybe a 5th round pick that I made in a startup is now worth a round 1 pick. And that's a good time to sell.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm going to hit you with a question. Mike is one of our most loyal YouTube followers. He follows every live stream we do. So, Mike, what's up? He wants to, it's a great question to ask. Do you prefer rookie picks in the draft, or do you just prefer everyone has their future picks? Like, do you prefer the 101 being there? Do you prefer like all the rookie names to be in there? What are your thoughts on rookies and startups?
I think that the rookie name should be in there, and I think the more information you have, the better. Obviously, like we were saying, the further off you delay that, and the longer it takes you to get your actual rookie draft done, is a little bit of a different thing, and it's obviously league by league. But I'm a much bigger fan of having as much information as possible.
I'm gonna take the neutral ground, and I'm gonna say if you're because startups are gonna start in February. At least
Yeah.
they are at the Patreon over at Dynasty Warzone's Patreon. But I would say up until about the NFL draft, we will just put the picks themselves in the draft room. So you can draft the 101, you can draft the 102, and I've done drafts like that where a
Okay.
GM will leave the league with
Right.
4 first-round picks and a bunch of young players. They're doing the productive struggle. Jerry, my normal co-host, is a big fan of that.
Yeah.
Some people ignore them entirely, and then or they'll trade their. So in this case, you'll be drafting 2022 firsts and seconds and thirds, but so they'll trade potentially their future first to try to get back into the rookie. It happens every year. But
Yeah.
once the NFL draft is over, just put the player. If you're doing a startup, say
Yeah.
May 15th,
Yeah.
just put the
Just put the
rookies in
name in
there,
there. Yeah.
and you draft them where you think they're worth compared to Cooper Cup or Derrick Henry or what have
Right.
you. So,
Yep.
all right. And if you're not following Anand on Twitter, he's at NANDURINFL. He is a tremendous follow, especially if college football's going on, if pro football's going on, if life's going on. It's you want to pronounce it better than me?
Yeah, it's Nanturi NFL. So, we have a
I,
fun time over there. I try not to take it too
it
seriously.
will be in the show notes. It will be
Yeah.
in the show notes. You can hit pause on this podcast. You can go in there, and I will be retweeting him if you're following me at DW. One of my absolute favorite follows. Puts many a smile on my face in the NFL. So
Thanks,
we've
Memphis.
first of all, anyone who knows me knows I say nothing that I don't want to because I'm too damn old and I'm not going to conform. You are a true blessing of a follow on Twitter, and everyone should be following you. I want to talk about a couple of veterans. Give me a couple of veterans that, whether they fit your dynasty build or not, just a couple of guys that you love and they're always going to be on your roster if it makes sense, or maybe not.
I think when you look at how much money, like actual money, has been invested into the kind of high tier of running backs that we had going into this year, whether it's Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, I'm always going to target a guy that a team has a big financial investment into. The reason is they're not going to take him off the field unless they need to. The Browns are not actively going to avoid are not going to actively avoid giving Nick Chubb the ball. The Titans are not going to actively avoid giving Derrick Henry the ball. Same with Carolina and Christian McCaffrey. Whereas if you take someone in that tier below, right, there are questions about whether Fournette's the guy when there's a Rojo, and there's just a lot of guys out there that you could have that are very productive for a season or for 2 seasons, but going forward, you have very little to no faith in. So I'm a fan of running backs that have gotten their second contracts, that people that have kind of passed that age apex where people are like sell, sell, sell. Yeah, obviously long term you want to sell them, but if you can be a buyer when people are selling at rates that just don't make sense, those are my favorite players to pick up. Guys that in redraft you would have easily in your top 10, but that for some reason dynasty players want to move off way too early.
No, and that is very well said. I've covered this actually a lot recently with the patrons. It's that if you were going to sell Cooper Kupp, you've missed your window. The season's over because he went from a legit game changer, dominator, to now he's just going to be a wide receiver who's going to be 29 in the offseason.
Yep.
He no longer serves you value. So if you're a contender, wait, or you're going to be a contender next year. Wait a couple of let the recency bias cool off, then go try to get Cooper Kupp for one first, because you're not getting Cooper Kupp for first. Not right now. Not when someone's going to point to what he recently did.
Yeah.
But when you let that market cool a little bit, and it's May, and he can't put any fantasy points in your lineup, then he won't be worth as much. But in season next year, it goes right back up. Rookie picks are the exact opposite. You start trying to buy rookie picks right now, you're dead in the water.
Yeah.
You're absolutely dead in the water, because the value is going to go up every day until your rookie draft, and then those players will cool off. Well, listen, man, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. Again, remind these people what you're doing, your Twitter handle, and anything else you'd want them to know, whether it's Roto Underworld related or not.
Yeah. So I got a obviously Nanduri NFL. I do a lot of work with Matt Kelly over at Roto Underworld, and he put out this book called The Dynasty Dominator that he was nice enough to send me as a early Christmas present. So obviously anybody following the podcast that's into Dynasty, at least give it a look, check it out. I know it's available on Amazon and a few other places. We do the Decision Point, but obviously me and Matt, obviously the people that we work with, whether it's Larky and Codebreaker or Cody Carpentier or any of the other people that we work with at Roto Underworld, they're all really, 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 really good at what they do. And I think that one of the funnest things about, being on Twitter and doing all the stuff that we do is getting to help people with, questions about, I get Browns fans all the time. Can we sign Baker Mayfield? That's a loaded question, but sure, I'll give you my 2 cents about it. And I think that's kind of the most fun that I have with what we do over here.
As the OG, and I took a ration of shit for a long time as the OG Baker skeptic. And I got this, and I know we're wrapping this one up, but I'm getting the same thing about Tua. I'm sorry, I'm getting Hawaiian Baker Mayfield vibes from Tua, because Tua was awesome when he was kicking the dog shit out of a COVID rattled Saints team and the Falcons and the Jets and all of those teams. But the minute that the playoffs are on the line and you got to go play a real defense that can take that RPO away from you, you looked awful limited.
Yeah.
So as one of the OG, first of all, I've always said this about players and people that I evaluate. First of all, if I think someone's going to be a bust or not going to, and I don't want to say bust, if I think someone's not going to meet expectations, my true hope is that young man proves me wrong.
Same.
Because the last thing I want to be is right about someone's career. I want everybody to get the bag. I want everyone to be successful. But I know the listeners of this podcast and the listeners to your content as well, they're counting on us to help them get it right. It's not about being right. It's about getting it right. Yep. So we can help you draft the right player. So, yeah, you don't have to sell me on Baker. You know what? What's weird is I softened my stance. I'm like, okay, Baker's got a really tough schedule this year. He plays the NFC North, so he's going to play the Vikings. He's going to play the Packers. He's going to have to throw the ball more. The Bengals are going to be better. The Ravens are going to be better. Steelers can score. All right, Baker's not going to be able to rely so much on Chubb. He should have a good QB2 season. So I finally give this man I give him an inch, and he makes me look like a moron. So, but hey, none of us get him all right. I was a Sam Darnold guy too, so you don't get him all right. But I mean, I think I did it right by reaching out, getting you on the podcast, and having you join us for a little bit, just talking football. And man, what a great way to get our guest season kicked off now that we're past the fantasy regular season.
Thanks again for having me, man. I had a great time, especially because most of the time I spend is on redraft and mostly like NFL stuff. So it was really nice to take a little bit different angle and talk a little Dynasty for a while. Thanks again for having me.
No problem. And I think you're selling yourself short because every time I'm telling you, that's why I listen to the Decision Point. As a Dynasty gamer, you have to listen to that show because it gets my Dynasty wheels spinning to hear Anand talk about the real NFL and how it relates to what we do as Dynasty. It's a huge benefit. Check him out at Nanduri NFL on Twitter. I'll retweet him. But on behalf of that man, his name again is Anand Naduri. My name is at DWZ Memphis. And remember, here at the Dynasty Warzone, we're just trying to make the world a better place for fantasy football. We'll see you back here with a new guest and hopefully Jerry. Thanks for putting up with the sound quality. And if you watched on YouTube, I really apologize for the soon-to-be renovated studio. Have a great week, guys. Talk to you soon.
Take care.